Hey everyone, welcome back to Grid Chat. We are talking about maybe the most stop and start race of the season. Very annoying, I would say. But luckily, I don't have to talk about that all by myself because the incredibly funny, wonderful James Coker is here to help me recap Qatar.
I cannot wait. I should have brought my Qatar.
For the audio listeners, there was no response to that other than to just pause. I love a good dad joke. You know what I mean? I think
I love it.
You knock them out.
I also thought what's so interesting is how many different pronunciations of Qatar there is. Like, I feel like the old pronunciation that Westerners had was Qatar, which is not correct.
Yeah.
And then you have people who just straight up say Qatar. I believe Crofty called it Qatar.
Yes, I think you're right about that.
I remember when the World Cup was going on, there was an ambassador who's Qatari who said the correct pronunciation. It's actually like you have to like get into your throat. It's like Qatar. I'm not doing it right. It's like Qatar or something like that. Anyway, yeah. I'm gonna say Qatar, but I don't know if it's right.
I think that's right. I think there's like. I do wish one thing Formula One would do a little bit like more of is actually finding out the right pronunciation so that everybody's saying it correctly, because everyone's saying whatever they say on the broadcast. But it's it's an accent thing, I guess. But and also maybe not a little lack of care thing too, to be fair.
Yeah, for sure. But or we could just say Lusail because that's the name of the circuit. But
true.
It's a new circuit. Like, this is only the third full Grand Prix they've had there. First one was in 2021. Mm-hmm. Then they skipped it in 2022 because of the FIFA World Cup, and then 23. And now we're at our third. Both races so far, I felt like were lackluster. Like, I think the first race in 2021, Lewis won by like 25 seconds or something like that.
Yeah.
And then last year we had the mandatory 18 lap max tire life on the tires due to the pyramid curve thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like we weren't expecting much of a race, and it kind of wasn't, and then it got really clusterfucky.
Yeah, I think it was honestly going into it, I agree. It was like one of those, we just don't have enough going on, but it was different than Brazil. I saw someone compare it to Brazil because we had probably the same number of stoppages and drama, but Brazil was at least like watching skillful drivers have to work through an issue with the rain and the conditions. And this just was like left and right safety cars, stoppages, and penalties that felt not great is the best way to put it.
Yeah.
So, and then also, as we were talking about before we got on, this is the race director's only his second race. And I don't know what his desire is, but it sort of felt like, how in like movies where they talk, or TV shows where they talk about going to prison and they're like, your first day in there, you got to just go up to the biggest guy and punch him in the face. That felt like the level of penalties that we got this weekend. Like it was just, hey, I'm here and I want to be clear.
Yeah, I think you're saying the PG version of that. It's you got to kick someone's ass or you become someone's bitch, is what they say.
You're right. Yeah, I went with the family friendly version of it.
I know you're saying, but I feel like a second race director's second race, maybe like they were making some decisions out of fear as well, especially in regards to the mirror that was just sitting there for laps on end until Valtteri Bottas ran over it and caused a ton of debris.
And that was ridiculous because, well, we'll definitely get into that part of it and when we get into the race itself. But some of what I'll say is my biggest issue with this race and with the race director's calls and the steward's calls is that the stuff that actually should have been stopped didn't get stopped. And the stuff that we saw, these penalties coming out left and right, some of them were penalties we haven't seen called in like at least this entire season, if not longer than that. And then also going into qualifying, you have Max just being heavily penalized directly after winning the championship. It's a weird vibe this year, I think, with the way that they've been kind of treating him.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
First and foremost, we had a sprint race weekend, which also I think, I don't know how you feel about this, but sprint race weekends on tracks where they don't have enough data and time, like having a sprint race on a track where we've only been there 3 times feels like we should potentially put those sprint races where the teams have enough data that they don't need these extra practice sessions.
Right.
I don't know. I know people have like left and right feelings about sprint races and sprint weekends, but it reduces us down to one practice session. And for a track that we don't know very well, it seems like that's part of where all these issues come from.
I'm still not sold on sprint races. I
Mm,
just don't think they're unique or different enough to justify having them. I get why you have them because it makes that Saturday ticket more valuable
mhm,
by having like a race with actual stakes as opposed to just getting to watch qualifying.
mhm.
However, they're just like not very interesting to me. I don't think the drivers like them. I don't think the teams like them. I think the only people that really like them are Formula One and the individual circuits that get to host them because maybe they make a little more money on that second day.
Mm,
But with the exception of like the sprint race in China this year, like I thought they were all kind of boring, and
that's fair.
I
Yeah.
don't care for them, and I think they should get rid of them.
Yeah, I feel, and also the point spread is not really enough, except for types of situations where it's like we had with Lando and Max, where you're just staying in contention for longer, not necessarily like actually moving the needle on the championship. It
Yeah.
feels like an odd. I do get what you're saying. Like, yeah, it does make the Saturday ticket more exciting. And if you go on Saturday, you still get to see a race. And a lot of people don't go the whole weekend and all of those things. But it is tough because I feel like it makes, so in some capacity it can make the feature race less exciting because Max's complaint has always been that it's just a preview. It tells you exactly what's going to happen on Sunday and takes the excitement out of it. And then you also end up with situations where, because they didn't have the practice session, the race itself has more driver error or more issues with the setup. And so
Mhm.
sometimes I feel like adding value can also take away value. I agree they haven't figured out a way to make the sprint worthwhile.
Yeah. Hundo P.
Yeah. But after all of that, to totally negate what I just said, the one thing I will say is that the ending of this sprint race really made me put Lando back in my good graces. I think if people have been listening, they know that I've been a little negative on our boy about his behavior. And I found that his choice to take a dangerous swap with Oscar at the very end was gentlemanly, I guess is the best word I can use, sportsmanlike.
Yeah, for sure. He even said that like the team told him not to do it,
Mhm.
and he didn't really tell them he was going to. He just did it. I think that showed a lot of maturity on his end. But yeah, he's gotten a lot of flack in the media. I do feel like there are times where maybe he's said things in a certain way that he shouldn't have, but I do feel like a lot of the things has said in interviews have been blown out of proportion.
Mhm.
It's like nothing he can say is will please what the media wants from him. Like sometimes he'll be very mature about it. He'll be like, listen, Max is like right now the best driver in Formula One and he is in incredible form. And I'm just doing my best and trying to drive my race. And then people will say, oh, he doesn't have the championship mentality. He's not
Yeah.
cutthroat. And then he'll say something that's a little more along the lines of being competitive and cutthroat. And then they'll say he's immature. So I'm
Right.
like, which version do you want? Like pick a lane. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it's real. It's that song that's trending on TikTok now that's like first I'm too messy, then I'm too clean. Like there's no pleasing. And I'll be honest, like he has not, I've been pretty irritable with him over the last little stretch.
Yeah.
In terms of like whether or not I do think he has the mentality to be a champion, or whether he is sort of like openly complaining about things in a way that like I felt didn't necessarily, not that he couldn't get there, but that he isn't there yet, so to speak, has been sort of how I felt about him. However, I did think that this was nice because it was something that was demonstrated on track that was positive for his relationship with his teammate and with the sport itself. I think the one thing that he said that a lot of people were like kind of back and forth on was him saying when they were going through the whole team orders situation that he didn't want to be handed a race win, and then over the radio sort of complaining about swapping positions and things like that. But I
Mhm.
thought his like desire to give the race win from the Brazil sprint back to Oscar to sort of even the playing field was a nice way to show kind of like how this sport does work and how it can be important to play for your teammate, but how you can give it back. At this point, he's out of contention for the Drivers' Championship. You can sort of not exactly, but sort of kind of even that playing field back, like give the favor back in a weird way, I guess.
Yeah, no. And I think he was trying to show that he was a team player, and I think it showed a lot of maturity. And so he deserves credit there for, I thought it was a nice gesture. But other than that, I thought the sprint race was incredibly boring.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty boring. And I think also one thing I did want to point out that I saw people talking about, Franco didn't suddenly like become a bad driver this weekend, both in the sprint and the feature race. He because they have crashed so much, they're back a couple of generations of the car, a couple of iterations of the car. So he's like running sort of the lowest possible spec, I think, that they could be running on that car.
Yeah. And he had a pit lane start in the sprint and was caught behind Checo, who was like asleep at the wheel or something. And he had to go around him. And then Hulkenberg didn't have any grip on his tires in the Grand Prix and then took him out on the first turn. So like that was not his fault. So
yeah, not at all. Did you see Christian Horner's response to Checo's start?
No.
Oh my God. So Checo, I think a lot, it was very unclear. Everyone was like, what is going on? Why is Franco going around him? So Checo starts from his pit lane start, lights go out. He just simply doesn't press the gas. He just stays where he is for a good couple of seconds, and long enough for Franco to be like, hit the brakes, keep from hitting him, and go around him. And Christian Horner was asked about it, and instead of, like everybody kind of thought maybe there's something wrong with the car or whatever. And Christian said, I don't know what happened, but when the lights go out, you're supposed to go. It's like, there's the basics of the sport. So I don't know. I think, not to jump into the rumors of everything already, but it is one of those things where we've seen Checo's personal sponsors now, like with Kit Kat recently, have now become sponsors of the entirety of Formula One.
Yeah.
There's a debate about whether or not that's cementing his position at Red Bull, or if it is those sponsors trying to stay in the sport knowing that he's leaving. But it's hard to continue to watch Checo perform in the way that he's performing. Like those things when it's like, okay, he didn't even hit the gas. He's not even watching to see if the race is about to start, and you're already in a pit lane start. I do get frustrated with that. I think those are the only times where I start to be like, okay, when everybody, like we've discussed before, has a reason aside from talent that they're on this grid. But sometimes there are these moments where you're like, okay, but you also are supposed to do the talent part too. Like everybody's got to have that.
Yeah, so, I think I agree. I think Checo is just like in a bad situation at Red Bull. I do think like he probably still has something left in the tank to provide to a team, but I just think the vibes are off. Both from his end and from Red Bull's end. And Red Bull like has whatever reason they have for keeping him in that seat. But I think psychologically, like the damage has been done. And I think he needs to go to a place where he can get his confidence back. And I don't think that's ever going to happen at Red Bull. Yeah.
Do you think he should move to a like more midfield team to be able to do that? Where there's less pressure?
Yeah, maybe. Checo's had like a great run in Formula One. He's been there for a very long time, and I would love to see him continue to drive in F1 in some capacity. I don't know if it's at a top team. I don't out of like the 4 top teams, I don't see where a seat for him would make sense.
Yeah.
But it might at one of the more midfield teams. But also I could see him in another series. Like I know he said he doesn't want to do IndyCar, but I think he would be great for Formula E, like, with a brand name team like a Tag Heuer Porsche or like a Neum McLaren, like a team that already has like a big following that he could bring a lot of money to. Like I think going to a series like Formula E would make a lot of sense for him.
I would actually be interested in seeing that. And we did see at the very beginning of the season, like I believe the CEO of Formula One did say that there's always a space for Checo at Formula E. Wasn't that the driver?
Oh, you're saying Jeff Dodds?
Yeah.
Said that CEO of Formula E. Yeah, I believe he said that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he said something about that. And like there's always a space for him there. Which I do think like Checo does bring a large market. And like you said, this is maybe not the best environment for him in terms of Red Bull itself. But I would be interested to see what type of popularity he could bring to the series that's very clearly trying to push into some of the same kind of energy and excitement of Formula One. They're starting to use some of the same circuits. They're going to Miami. They're trying to kind of hit that same level of glamour, but obviously they're not at the same ticket price point, which makes it easier to get there. I think right now their Black Friday sale for Formula E's Miami race is literally you can get 4 tickets for $100, which is wild. So I think you're right. He could be a large added value to a series like Formula E, where there is this intent to kind of move forward, and there is exciting racing, and there is skill that he could bring there. I kind of been maybe that Checo, if you're listening, could be cool
for sure.
But yeah, I think otherwise on the sprint, it was sort of it sprinted and left
for sure. I think the only funny moment we saw from the sprint was the press conference afterwards, where Lando Norris cursed and George Russell was like, "That's a fine."
Yes, and the ego comments as well, with Oscar saying there's no ego and George leaning over and saying, "No ego." I don't know. He was a little funnier this week. I'll be honest with you. George actually landed some good jokes this week.
George Russell has grown on me this season.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, we have talked about this. He has grown on you. I remain indifferent, but
that's fine.
That's okay. You know, sometimes you gotta. Indifference probably the best you can be for a lot of things. Hatred is worse. You know,
so. For sure.
Yeah, but he landed a couple good jokes. I will say, did you see the like not trophy presentation, but like they get their little plaques for the sprint? And it was what is that content creator's name? He's the one who always does the little like
Kabi Lami.
Thank you. George just did that he did the like classic little hand.
I think he was explaining to Oscar and Lando who Kabi Lami was. I think maybe they didn't know who he was, even though he's like one of the most famous people on the internet. Kabi Lami has like 80 million followers on TikTok.
Yeah.
He's like the Charlie Chaplin of our time. Like he's essentially took what like made silent films so popular and makes this content that transcends language, which is like, and it's so simple. And I think maybe they didn't know who he was. George was like, come on, it's the guy that like does this thing.
That's funnier. I like that better than him just sort of gesturing at Kabi Lami. Just sort of and be like, yeah, okay, bro.
I think they didn't know who he was, even though he's like infinitely more famous than they are. You know what I mean?
That is something that I do think about sometimes when we have these like, it's been interesting to see the way like Formula One fans react to certain creators being at places or presenting trophies, or even random celebrities that are the trophy presenters or pole position presenters or things like that. And it's interesting because it's like, objectively, you're right. If you stopped a random person on the street and showed them a picture of Kabi Lami and Lando Norris, 99% of people are going to know Kabi Lami and not know Lando Norris, which is kind of interesting.
Well, I was talking to David Paro, who's the head of partnerships for MoneyGram, of course, is like the title sponsor for Haas F1 team. And they have like Kabi Lami as a brand ambassador, and they've had him attend. They had him attend the Las Vegas Grand Prix, and I think they also had him attend the Qatar Grand Prix at Lusails. And they said walking around with him, they have to have like security detail because like everybody wants to stop and take a photo with him. People lose their mind seeing him.
That's so funny.
Yeah. It's just, he's big.
I love that. Yeah. I do think it's interesting because it's like Formula One, as intense as it is and as global as it is, really is like a sort of subculture. Like not everybody knows about it. Not everybody knows these guys.
It's niche. Yeah. I mean, most people who don't follow F1 know who any of the drivers are outside of Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah. And also there's this female creator I see every once in a while on TikTok who's based in London, and she goes to like pretty popular areas, and you would think in London most people would know Formula One in general, and she'll show pictures of.
Are you talking about Bella James?
Is that who I'm talking about?
I think so.
That sounds probably right.
Bella James does content like that, and there's another content creator named Sky who's also British who does something similar as well.
Yeah, where it's like they're asking, like, do you think that these people are related? Do you know who, like, all these or what do you think this man's job is? Type of thing.
What do you think they do for a living?
Yes.
And everyone thinks like George works in finance,
right? And it's like these people are so famous and so wealthy and so well known, but only in the circle of people that know them.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's cool. But I think also, like, just it's interesting because people are trying to find ways to make that a bigger space to bring more excitement into it. And so, like, sometimes that is celebrities and content creators that are not associated with Formula One at all, because it's a space where you can get people to be like, oh, that's a viral image of George doing the gesture. And then people are kind of like, what's going on? Why is he at this race? It's like it's an interesting thing, I think, of trying to expand. Because I've always said that the best thing about sports is the best way to get someone into sports is to get them in on like a person or a small moment. So sometimes you do see like people getting into Formula One from fan cams or from like a memeable moment or something like that. Or literally, like, I've seen people be like, I didn't know what this was, but I love watching Gordon Ramsay behave in a funny way. And they're seeing like pictures of him in his chef's coat on the track or little things like that, or people doing hot laps. Those are like moments that are getting people interested in the sport. And so it's kind of fun to see, I think. A small tangent about the power of the internet and celebrity, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, getting into the race itself, when we go into qualifying, I think it was a little heartbreaking to watch the turn for Mercedes. We went right back to Lewis sort of being right back down on himself afterwards, saying, I'm just not fast anymore. Maybe I don't have it. And Max did have like a small interview where he was like, I don't think he could ever lose it, which I thought was nice to see the development between their relationship.
Yeah, very mature.
Yeah. But it's hard. It's hard to watch Lewis fall from what we saw in Vegas to this.
I still have like the conspiracy theory that like George is getting all these upgrades that he's not, and the car is being tailored to him, his driving style, and not Lewis's. I still feel that way.
I honestly, I agree. And also it's like in a space that it at this point makes sense. Like this whole year, why would you build a car around Lewis knowing that he's leaving versus George is staying? Other than the fact that it's hard to watch and no one enjoys that type of energy, but it does make sense.
Yeah. And I think it was hard. And Lewis clearly didn't want to be there. And we'll talk about it later. He like wanted to retire, and they're like, "No, don't
do that."
They're like, "Actually, yeah, I do."
And he's like, "Oh, maybe I'll stay." It was hard. I think also Mercedes has been sort of back and forth this year, where it's like they come in and they have such strong practice sessions, or they take things apart and they put it back together, and suddenly the car goes from fastest lap after fastest lap to just a sinking rock.
Yes.
So
yeah,
it was hard. And also, I think we've talked about this before too, especially I think all year, but we've seen George continually out-qualify Lewis, and then Lewis continually out-race George, which has been, this was a race where that wasn't possible. There just wasn't enough time of clean racing for Lewis to really make up those places, and then for him to continually have issues as well. So I thought it was just it was a bummer. It was a bummer if you were a Lewis Hamilton fan, I guess.
Yeah, totally. I think this season, I might be wrong, but I believe the number is George has outqualified Lewis like 17-5.
I think you're right. Yeah.
And Hayden Gullis, who I host WTF1 with, always talks about how George Russell, it seems like this season, will like qualify really high. Lewis will qualify somewhere further back, but at the end of the race, they are right next to one another.
Yeah. Which
meeting in the middle.
I think is interesting because it really shows sort of like qualifying is important, and on certain tracks it's more important than others. But when you get into the racing itself, it's interesting because I think George, and part of why I haven't gotten to the point that George has grown on me, I think, is that George has the mentality that you do have to have, which is that I'm better than anyone on this track, which even if it's not true, you do have to believe in order to keep getting out there every day. But his mentality of it and the way he talks about it, where he specifies that he thinks he's better than Lewis, I think has been part of what makes it hard to like really latch on to him. and I think when you watch in the race itself, there's this imbalance, obviously, of it feels like the car is sort of more tailored to George. We'll never know the answer to that, but we do know that there are places where Lewis has been given upgrades that he didn't want, and George has been given upgrades that when they only had options for one. So we do know that the cars have been different all season. But even with that, if I personally think the racing is more important than qualifying, unless you're literally at Monaco.
It depends on the track. I know like there are certain tracks such as I believe at Coda, no one's ever like won the race outside of like the top 6 qualifying. There are like certain tracks where like you need to like be on the front 3 rows in order to win the race and or finish on the podium. But yeah, no, you're right. There are certain drivers that have the ability to do incredible comeback drives. We saw it from Max in Brazil. I mean, granted that was in the wet, but still to like win the race from what was it, P17? It's just like
I think it was the most impressive one. So it's I don't know. I think it's it'll be interesting to see next year when we see Lewis move to Ferrari if this energy of like, do I still have it? It seems to leave if he's at a place where he knows he's going to be long term and the team is working with him in a different way.
And he's going to be prioritized.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So we'll see. The other qualifying thing I want to talk about is the situation between George and Max, because we have, I don't know if you saw the footage of them right after the race, but immediately George went up and was like talking about Max blocking him, which ultimately the stewards gave him a 1 grid penalty for.
But they were both not on a push lap. They were both on an out lap. So like, I don't understand what the big deal was.
I felt that it was a penalty that shouldn't have been given. Obviously, it didn't ultimately matter, but it's like, I do think that was the start of all of these penalties that were thrown throughout the entire race that were just unnecessary. Like, it did not affect the outcome of qualifying. So to allow the penalty to then affect the outcome of qualifying is frustrating.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess I'd have to sit down and look at the rule book and it's all up to interpretation, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't see why that penalty would apply if you're not impeding an actual flying lap.
Yeah. So, yeah, I agree.
You got that. And then we do have George inherit pole from there. And we have we're set for a good excitement of the race. We have Lando 3rd, Max 2nd, George 1st, and had the race gone pretty clean, I think we would have had a fun race.
Yeah, I just feel like Max took the lead and never give it up, and lots of stops and starts. I think the most exciting part of the race was the restart on one of the safety cars. You had some really like close wheel-to-wheel racing for those first few turns. But other than that, I just kind of thought it was like a lackluster race that just had like a lot of stops and starts. And I had no idea what was going on with that mirror, like why they didn't just pull out a safety car or a VSC to get it off the track.
We had that mirror resulted in 2 flat tires. And that was from Lewis and from Carlos. And Carlos, I was shocked, was able to get the car back into the pits to be able to swap that tire out because it was fully gone. He was just driving on the thing, which was interesting. And then you also have Valtteri hitting it as well. It was just across the board. Do we know whose mirror it was that came off?
I don't know whose mirror it was, but I know the reason Valtteri ran over it is because he was a back marker and was getting a blue flag. And so he had to move out of the way to let somebody pass on the straight. And in moving out of the way, he ran over the mirror.
Got it. So I was really confused because they stopped the race so much. And why would you not stop the race for like literal glass debris? But
yeah,
I don't know. Boo is how I feel about it, me personally. And then you also have from there, I will say with the restarts in general, we did get some really fun like midfield racing between Alex Albon and Kevin Magnussen. And that was fun to watch. It was fun to watch them battle back and forth.
Yeah, no, it was. And there was one very fun pass on Magnussen over Albon where he said some expletive and on the radio, and his
Yes.
engineer was like, "Nice one, Kev."
I think, yeah, he literally passed him and was like, fuck off. Yeah, period. Speak your truth. Sometimes I do wonder, because obviously the drivers can't hear each other's radio inside, but I do wonder if they sit and rewatch the radio as well to hear it, because it is sometimes very funny. And also, like, I would have beef. You know what I mean? Because it's one of those things where it's like other sports you can trash talk in the middle of the game, right? Like basketball, you can get in someone's face and get in their head. And
Yeah.
in Formula One, you really it's the on track fighting. You can't trash talk where they can actually hear you.
I've made this argument for years that Formula One and all motorsports needs proximity chat, where
Yes.
if like you're close enough to another car, you can radio them.
I like that. Like, as long as you're in DRS zone, you can send them a radio.
Yeah.
I'm
All of a
coming
sudden
for
you're
you.
picking up the radio. Yeah. It'd be funny.
I would like that, actually. I feel like, do you feel if they did do that, you would see more, like, I guess it would be dangerous, obviously, but like
It would be dangerous. They would never do it. It'd just be very funny.
It would be fun. I do wonder if you'd see more crashing or if you'd see more like bumper car behavior from it. If someone was able to like make a joke about your mom on the way, you know?
Possibly. Because
Yeah.
you'd see someone like goading someone to maybe be a little more dangerous than they normally would.
I think I'm in favor for it, actually, now that you say that. I think
Hell yeah.
maybe not the whole race, you know what I mean? But only in a certain proximity of range, you should be able to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
A little walkie-talkie. We'll have to get someone in on that. You know what I mean? You could
Yeah.
have a sponsor that came up with it. Like WhatsApp is they have the WhatsApp button on the Mercedes wheel. If
Which
we
is
did
great.
like another messaging service with a button of like trash talk, I'm into it.
I would love that. Or it's a trash talk brought to you by like Waste Management.
Ooh, that's fun. I like that.
Know, the sponsor of the Phoenix golf
Yeah.
tournament that's like a total mess.
Just like the random waste man. Yes. I think that could be fun. I'm into it. If anyone's listening, we've got a great pitch for you. And it would result in some viral, funny moments, I think, you know?
Hundo P.
So then the other big thing going into this race, we already knew that the Drivers' Championship was decided last week, but we have the Constructors' Championship still between McLaren and Ferrari. And McLaren did have the possibility of closing it out this week, which obviously they did not end up doing. And when we talk about the stewards, which feels like the big highlight of this race was the race director and the penalties and the stewards, Lando getting the penalty that he got that has not been called, which was a stop-start under safety car. It was a 10-second penalty, and he had to go into the pits to serve it, which effectively makes it a 30-second penalty.
Yeah.
Which completely destroyed his race and obviously also destroyed their point standings.
Yeah.
How do you feel about calls that can make that big of a difference in an actual championship race?
I think it'd be one thing if it was like the penalties were consistent, but I just feel like it's a new race director and it just felt like they were just sort of making it up as they went along. And I understand why you gave him the penalty, because he didn't lift during a yellow flag in an area when he should have lifted. He didn't slow down. So maybe a 5-second like time penalty, but like a 10-second stop go penalty is like incredibly harsh. And totally ruined his race. Because like I think at the end George Russell got a 5-second time penalty, but he still maintained his position because he was still that far ahead of Gasly. But if it had been a stop go penalty, he'd be back where Lando was or further back.
Exactly.
It felt harsh and inconsistent.
Yeah. I think also it's frustrating because the Constructors' Championship, it wouldn't even just be for, I think I would be as irritated even if it were for someone lower in the field where it has the same type of effect, because it's millions of dollars for the team next year between each. And obviously the Constructors' Championship is a very big deal. So it's a little frustrating, I think, when you have something not only inconsistent, but that inconsistency affecting the outcome of something that should be based on racing and capabilities of the team, as
Yeah.
opposed to something that simple. But like you said, a 5-second penalty that could have been just added on to his time at that point in the race, I think would have been fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it was just like in my opinion, like broad strokes, this was a boring race that ended up getting very clusterfucky
Yeah.
due to the mismanagement of leaving that mirror out on the track, it getting run over and having to do all these safety cars, yellow flags, and whatnot. I mean, we ended up having 5 DNFs, 2 of which were just from the first turn. That wasn't like the race director's fault. But yeah, it was just, I'm still not convinced that Qatar is like a good race or will ever be a good race unless they change something.
I agree. And generally speaking, I do wonder how much of it could have been better if they had simply like stopped to clear the debris. How much of the race would have been a little bit more exciting.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, they definitely solved part of the issue from last year by moving it later in the year. So it didn't seem like the heat was as much of a factor as it was last year because it was so painfully hot, and Logan Sargent didn't even finish the race. I think it was a combo of the heat and him being sick. But like, you know, I remember last year, Oscar Piastri said it was like the hardest race he'd ever driven in his life. I do feel like they solve some of those issues by moving it further back in the calendar. But also it's one of those, it's a risk you take being towards the tail end of the Formula One calendar, because you run the risk of having a dead rubber race. Like last year, you know, the last 6 races were dead rubber races. So like when there aren't any stakes, like I know we still have a constructors battle, but driver's championship is what most fans watch it for.
Yeah.
And you don't have those stakes. It's hard to find a reason to care.
What's really interesting about that too, about the drivers' championship being the thing that everyone's focused on, is that the drivers' championship comes with nothing than other than the trophy. Obviously, like their own team may bonus them or something like that, but all of the money that's being won for a Formula One team in the Formula One situation is determined by the constructors championship. So what's most important for next year is really where everyone finishes in the constructors championship. It's what determines how much time they have in the wind tunnel and all these different levels of, you know, things that could affect the future of the teams. Whereas the drivers championship is more of just being able to say that you were the best, which obviously is important. And it's interesting that as fans overall, we're more interested in the individual than the team as a whole, because the sport itself is so much about the team.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's also one of the few sports that has both of those things, that you have a team championship and one guy that is the best type of thing.
Yeah.
One thing that we did not talk about that's very important to me, Zhou scored points for the first time. That was very exciting.
I was so excited. That was the one silver lining of this race, is I was very happy for Zhou Guanyu, and I was very happy for Steak / Kick / Sauber / whatever the F you want to call it. Almost had a Sauber double points, and then Lando ended up passing Valtteri. But I was very happy that they're not going to be pointsless this season. Zhou Guanyu got a well-deserved driver of the day. Very happy for him. I'm sad that he's leaving Formula One, but I think there's still talks that he might be going to possibly Ferrari as a reserve driver. I know he was in their academy when he was younger. So it'd be nice to still see him in Formula One in some capacity. But was super pumped for Zhou. Voted for him for driver of the day. Happy he won it. That was nice.
He was my driver of the day, and obviously everybody's ended up winning. But I was really happy to see him, because it was a good drive too. Like, I think a lot of times for drivers that we're seeing sort of at the back half of the grid, or drivers that are leaving like Zhou, it's hard because a lot of times they don't have anything that they can point to, even though being on the track and finishing the race is an accomplishment in itself in this sport. But Zhou making it through when 5 cars DNF'd, avoiding all of the sort of issues that happened in this race, and not only making it through but scoring points, I was very happy to see it. Very exciting. So
Yeah.
Hope to see him in some capacity, like you said, as a reserve driver or something like that. And then additionally, like I think the guys who are fighting to stay in reserve driver positions are now also fighting to be seen by Cadillac when we have our 11th team in 26.
Right. Yeah. Have you already talked on this podcast about who you are speculating might end up being considered for that seat?
We have not. And I was going to ask you who you were thinking about. So I'm glad that we've arrived at this part because I think it's more exciting than what happened. But for
There's
anyone
a bunch of news things I want to talk to you about.
Let's do it.
If you have time for it.
I have so much time.
There's a lot of speculation that, like, if you were like, okay, it's going to be Cadillac / GM.
Mm-hmm.
You want to put American drivers in there.
Mm-hmm.
Like some interesting ones that I would like to see, like Colton Herta makes a lot of sense. He almost came to F1 and I think he ended up not getting an opportunity because it was like a super license points issue.
It was, yeah. The FIA did not want him in Formula One.
Yeah. So Colton Herta makes a lot of sense, but like Colton Herta, even though he's like one of the highest paid drivers in IndyCar, still hasn't really proven himself in IndyCar. Like he's a really talented driver, very young, because of a great pedigree. His dad was an incredibly talented and accomplished and successful driver in his own right. So yeah, it'd be cool to see Colton Herta. He makes a lot of sense. I think Joseph Newgarden would be very fun because he's just like, he sort of like projects what everyone assumes and Americans are like.
Yeah.
He's like a stereotypical like poster boy for like classic Americana.
Yeah. He's a man who drinks milk to me for sure.
100%. Definitely Homelander vibes. Like Joseph Newgarden would be very fun.
Yeah.
He dressed up like Homelander for Halloween this year. I thought that was very funny.
That is funny.
It was a great costume though. It was like TV, like movie quality. It was a very high quality costume. I don't know where he got it, but
wow.
Joseph Newgarden would be very fun also, but he's also like Mr. IndyCar. I don't think he'll ever leave IndyCar.
Agreed.
Seeing someone like, he still has to prove himself in Indy next, but seeing like Miles Rowe get an opportunity to be in a seat like that would be very cool. But like he, I think still has like a season or two to prove himself in Indy next and also probably IndyCar proper. There is some speculation that this guy's a McLaren driver, Ugo Chukwu.
Okay.
Who is a 17-year-old American driver who is a McLaren. He's in like the McLaren pipeline right now.
Okay.
He won the Macau Grand Prix this year.
Oh, okay.
Which, a lot of people are like, that's like the ultimate race for like young junior drivers who are coming through the pipeline. And some really big drivers have driven in the Macau Grand Prix and won the Macau Grand Prix. He's really young, has started to prove himself, but also this is like kind of a wild card. I'd love to see Kyle Larson because like
interesting.
We get all these like conversations about who's a better driver, like Max Verstappen or Kyle Larson. And it's like, oh, they drive very different series. Like Kyle Larson grew up like driving on dirt tracks and mainly does stock cars, but also, we saw him try to pull the double this year and did very well in the Indy 500. So he definitely could do some open wheel stuff, but we haven't seen him do open wheel on a road course. That was just Indy 500 course and oval. So like a lot of different options. I think the most likely options for Cadillac GM is like Colton Herta and like Alex Palou.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you're seeing them go for American IndyCar drivers as like a core possibility.
At least to begin with.
Yeah.
And I think it's the only time we're ever going to see drivers come from IndyCar to F1.
Yeah.
And it's probably never going to be that again.
No, I agree. My big one that I really want, actually, which is not an American driver, but is from IndyCar, is Pato O'Ward. Because there would have to be conversations with McLaren, obviously, about that. But I think Pato deserved to get the seat when he first was supposed to come into Formula One. And that would have been with Red Bull. And like after he wasn't able to get his seat because of super license points, and then he ended up going over to McLaren for IndyCar, and he's been doing a great job there. I think there's like a really cool thing if we go with one American driver and then Pato. I think the really cool thing about that would be being able to bring the excitement that he has behind him into this new 11th team that is going to face pushback just for being an Andretti associated American team. I think it'd be cool.
I would love to see Pato O'Ward driving for Cadillac or GM. I just don't know if McLaren is
Would
ever
allow
going
that,
to
yeah.
be willing to let go of him. Like,
Yeah.
I speculate, and this could just be like, you know, me wearing a tinfoil hat, that like they're hoping to bide their time and eventually like Lando or Oscar move on to another team and Pato slots into that other seat.
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to figure out who's going to end up being their number one driver. Is it going to be Lando or Oscar down the road?
Mhm.
Because I think they see how popular Pato is just being an IndyCar driver. He has more followers on social media than IndyCar does as a whole. And he's so charismatic, and I've never met him personally, but everyone I know that's met him said he's just a lovely human being. He's a marketing goldmine. And I think McLaren would be very, very hesitant to let him slip between their fingers.
I do agree that it's going to be hard, but I do think potentially Cadillac could put McLaren under pressure to make that decision earlier, at least.
Yeah.
Which I really would like to see, because I do hate to see him sort of like, as you said, being sort of waiting in the wings, waiting for one of the two Formula One drivers at McLaren to decide they don't want to be there anymore, because you're competing with some really great, drivers that have no interest in leaving and also bring a pretty large fan base. So it's hard because there's no world where they necessarily fire Lando or Oscar to bring in Pato, because neither of them are driving in a way that you need to get rid of them. And so I do hope that maybe Cadillac could at least put pressure on McLaren to make a decision faster and to let Pato's team know that there's a possibility elsewhere for him to come into Formula One.
The reason I brought up Palou is because Palou has won 3 of the last 4 IndyCar championships. And also there is a connection between him and Cadillac, because he drove for Chip Ganassi in Cadillac in the 24 Hour of Le Mans. And I know the rumor is Alex Palou desperately wants an opportunity to drive an F1, and he was really lobbying for that open AlphaTauri seat last year.
Oh, interesting.
But it was just a rumor. I don't know if it's true, but I think Pato O'Ward would be amazing. I'd love to see Pato O'Ward at F1 for IndyCar's sake. I hope IndyCar never lets him leave, because I think he is so important and vital to the growth of that series. But I don't know if Pato O'Ward is ever going to have the opportunity to win with Aaron McLaren. Like, they just have been so inconsistent in IndyCar. And it seems like unless you're driving for Chip Ganassi or Penske, you aren't really going to have like a legit opportunity to compete for a championship. And so I don't know.
I agree.
What do I know? I'm just a fan.
Just a fan. just a guy who loves car. I also, the last wild card I will throw in from the IndyCar world, and having something to do with Andretti specifically, I have seen intentionally a couple of clickbaity things where people are trying to say, like, bring up Jamie Chadwick. And while I don't think that she doesn't have the super license points anyway, but Jamie won't be one of the first 2 drivers in that initial driver lineup for GM and Cadillac. But I do think there's a possibility that we see her look at potentially moving over from the Williams side of things in Formula One over to GM, Cadillac, and Andretti, because it ties together very easily with what she's doing in Indy next.
Sure, yeah.
And Andretti did give her a test with IndyCar. So it could be interesting to see, do they move her up into IndyCar soon and then potentially look at getting her to the place where she could be in the conversation at least, or a test driver, or involved in some capacity in their sort of move into Formula One, which could be cool.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
That'd be I will say that I think the ones that people are saying that she'll be on the team, those are clickbait, because it's not currently a situation where she has the points to be able to do that.
And I think she needs to continue to prove herself
agreed.
To even be considered. Like, I mean, she was unbelievable in Indy Next last year. or Indy NXT, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
But she was really, really impressive and deserved the test with IndyCar and Andretti.
Mhm.
And I think deserves an opportunity to drive an IndyCar.
Absolutely.
And I think if like she gets that opportunity and gets a ride and is able to prove herself in IndyCar, then absolutely she should be considered.
Mhm.
And also, I think if she gets the opportunity to test in a Formula One car again, and her times are similar to the other drivers,
Yeah. Put her in.
definitely get the look.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd like to see her in IndyCar first anyway. Like, I'd like to see her actually run a full season in IndyCar in a space that she's already pretty comfortable with, and on tracks that she knows and those types of things. But I do think it could be an interesting bridge, obviously, into a different pool of talent, given GM, Cadillac, and Andretti's associations with the American market and with IndyCar and Indy Next. I think we could see that move over a little.
Have you already talked about the GM Cadillac move on this podcast?
Very briefly last week. We didn't really get into it super intensely.
And I'm, sort of cherry picking like opinions from other people and also some other memes I saw, but this very much feels like a Trojan horse situation where
Mm,
like Andretti didn't get in the direct way, and now F1 has agreed to let GM Cadillac in. Mario Andretti immediately gets named board of directors or director of
yeah,
the board. Like we're probably eventually going to find out that Michael Andretti is going to be like the team principal.
right.
This also happened months after Michael Andretti announced he was taking a step back from running Andretti Global.
Yeah.
And there was all sorts of speculation of why that was. This definitely feels like a Trojan horse situation.
Agreed. Oh, this was the other little thing that we have not talked about that is relevant to our conversation about who might be there. Zach Brown also seems to have been involved in some investing and movement with Michael stepping down. And so I do wonder, it seems now looking back on it, hindsight's 2020, it does seem like all of these moves that were made in the last few months were about that Trojan horse of getting them into Formula One. And
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so I'm curious to see, like, obviously, we know from the comment that Mario made that sparked the FBI investigation into Liberty Media, which is certainly a sentence, but it was based off of Mario saying that the at that time CEO of Liberty Media, I think his name is Greg,
Greg Maffei.
yeah, Greg Maffei, said that he would do anything in his power to keep Mario out of Formula One. And that was the comment, so to speak. It's all hearsay too. It's just that Mario said that this happened.
Yeah.
That was what sparked that FBI investigation. However, we did see that Greg stepped down, and then all the Michael moves out of Andretti Global, and Cadillac and GM drop Andretti from the name for their bid, and then everything gets approved. So it is interesting to see, and it is sort of like this. It does sort of feel like that kind of business deal where they're basically like, "We'll let you do it, but you cannot have your name associated with us."
Right. DOJ investigation, not FBI investigation.
Oh,
Just
really?
wanted to double check. But yeah, interesting. Interested to see how this continues to develop, and I'm very excited. Like I'm excited that there should be 11 teams on the grid. I think there should be 12 teams. I've been
Yeah,
saying, me and a lot of other fans have been saying the same thing. Like there's room for 12 teams on the grid.
yeah,
Uh, not just for two more teams, but like there's such a bottleneck on the Formula One grid when it comes to drivers.
mhm,
Like let's open up and 4 more seats.
yeah.
Um,
Even just
yeah,
this year, the drivers that will be available to Cadillac that have Formula One experience that are now leaving would be Zhou, Logan Sargent, um,
Valtteri,
Valtteri Bottas, and
Kevin
sorry,
Magnussen.
and Kevin Magnussen, right? That's all. Is that everybody who's leaving?
Yeah,
Yeah. So you'd have out of those, 4 drivers, you have a possibility of bringing someone on that already has a demonstrated fan base, understanding, and experience in the sport. And so it could be that we see one of those drivers as well as an American driver or something along those lines. But I think those guys that are fighting for those reserve driver positions are going to make a big difference for their ability to kind of negotiate in that space too.
yeah,
So we'll
for
see.
sure.
Um,
Amen.
Last but not least at all, because it was my most exciting thing about the weekend, in F1 Academy, we saw Abbi Pulling get crowned F1 Academy champion, which was
Yeah,
very
she's been
exciting.
dominant this year.
Insanely dominant. She won even just coming in second to Dorian, who is her main competitor for the season.
And they also unfortunately canceled the second race.
They did, which was I think I saw a lot of there were two things that I did see people talking about that I thought were worth discussing. One was the cancellation of the second race, which is unfortunately just the nature of being a support race. There was a barrier that needed to be repaired, and the timing of
Mhm.
it ended up resulting in the fact that they couldn't delay long enough. They had to cancel the race. It sucks, but it
Yeah.
does happen, and that's just the nature of that.
Yeah.
However, the one thing I did see that I was pretty a little frustrated to see, Sky Sports cut away from Abby's podium of being crowned champion.
Oh, interesting.
So it seems a lot of people were very upset, especially UK viewers, because you have a British driver winning a champion and the coverage cut away to do like pre-show stuff. They didn't stay for like the 3 minutes it would have taken to
Oh,
actually crown her
bummer.
champion, which I thought was a little frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a bummer. And I do feel like since it started, I feel like F1 Academy has lost some momentum in the mainstream media. I feel like
Mm,
it doesn't get a ton of coverage.
mhm.
And I feel like that's also on us as content creators. I feel like I know you talk about F1 Academy a lot, but a lot of us don't talk about it.
Yeah,
And so it's also on us to keep F1 Academy as part of the conversation. I do think it's hard bandwidth wise because there's so many different series,
yeah.
but it is one that we should be talking about, even though it is like an F4 class series.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's important, and I hope in the future, in the next seasons, it gets a bigger spotlight. Yeah,
No, I think you're right. I think, yeah, like I have tried to make sure I keep F1 Academy in my coverage all year. And I think I would love to see more people doing that because the racing is exciting. It's actually quite fun to watch. The cars are smaller and it allows them to, on tracks that you don't see as much passing on the Formula One race, you're going to see a lot more kind of wheel to wheel racing in F1 Academy. And as much as like, we're not going to see these girls move straight into Formula One, and a lot of people don't watch kind of feeder series or things like that. I do think it's important for us as content creators because it costs us nothing to do that, and it costs
yeah.
F1 a ton to be able to market the show and market the series.
No,
Um,
you're right.
and when we were in Vegas, they did this kind of female quotient event where Susie Wolf spoke. And one of the things that she mentioned that I thought was interesting was she called F1 Academy like that they're basically a startup. The same way you would be a startup for any other company. This is only the second year of the series, and it's the first year that they're being supported by Formula One and that they're being considered a Formula One support series. And also the first year that you can watch every race for free on YouTube. I think they've done so much work with the little resources that they do have. And it's resources that we didn't see the W Series get. And that's part of what made the W Series have such a struggle in terms of being able to remain and to be successful. And this is the first time we're seeing a series like this be awarded super license points for where you finish in the series. Like the girls this year will get super license points toward their toward the ability to race in F1, which obviously doesn't mean that they're going to get enough points doing this to one of them suddenly jump from F1 Academy to F1. But
Right.
it's giving the series this series has gotten a lot of legitimacy in the last year, and
Hmm.
I do wish we had seen content creators and news sources continue to talk about them as much as they could because the season was really great, and we can always do more. You can always talk more about things, but covering Abby Pulling winning this is a really big deal, and I would love to see people talk about it more. Is all I think, but yeah,
Agreed. Hard
that's my
agree.
feeling. Yeah.
Um, I am also interested to see what Abby Pulling's going to do next year because I think similar to Formula 2, if you win the series, you cannot go back.
So she will officially, the prize for the winner of Formula One Academy this year is a fully funded seat in GP3. And so if you're not familiar with what GP3 is, it's sort of a comparable series to Freca. It's not exactly the same. They are racing cars that are closer to F3 cars, whereas Freca is going to be an F4 car. It's still a mixed grid series, and they're racing on different tracks. So the kind of trade-off is if you go to GB3, you're going to get closer car experience to an F3 car, but less track experience based off of the tracks that F3 drives on. Whereas on F4, you're going to get more track experience that would be similar to F3 and a little bit less power and a less similar car. So Abbi will have a fully funded seat in GB3 next year. And we'll see her, I would assume, most likely take that seat and race there, which is a step towards her moving into F3 and then continuing on after that. The question will be in between those two things. Like the move from F4 to F3 is millions of dollars in terms of sponsorships. So I'm hopeful that we'll see people be excited enough about Abbi and see her perform well enough in GB3 that she continues to warrant sponsorship and the money she would need to move into F3. But that would be her next step.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So we'll see. And then we'll see what happens with the other girls because they do have a 2-year cap. So we are getting ready to lose a lot of girls this year to next year. Bianca Bustamante, Lola. Actually, I think there's only 5 of the drivers this season that can continue on to next season. I might be wrong on that number. But yeah, so we'll have a pretty big grid turnover. Tommy Hilfiger just announced his new driver who's only currently 15 years old. She'll be 16 when the season starts. And I believe she actually started karting in 2020. That's how quickly she's kind of turned into this level of a driver. So that'll be really cool too. Her name is Alba Hurup Larsen.
Very cool.
So yeah.
Dorian Penn still drives for Iron Dames, right?
She does, yeah.
And I know the champion from the first season, Marta Garcia Lopez, was driving in the Ligier series, which I think is like a ladder series to Elms or European Le Mans series. And so I wonder if any of them will go into like sports car racing or endurance racing.
It could be interesting to see. We do know that Marta is not going to continue in single seaters next year at present. She was as her championship gave her last year, she did get a fully funded seat in Freca this year. And then that seemed to be put under the Iron Dames after a certain chunk of time. They moved both Dorian and Marta under the Iron Dames sort of banner in Freca, because Dorian was competing in Freca at the same time as competing in F1 Academy, which was interesting to see. And so I think we're going to also see that a little bit of that too, where some of the drivers who have a little bit more promise or understanding of their single seater experience, because F1 Academy is only 7 races, they can sort of also race in. We saw a lot of the girls racing in other F4 series all season. And so I think we'll see a little bit more of that, which hopefully means that the move into a Freca seat or a GB3 seat slowly becomes a potential to move into F3 faster, which I think could be great. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. Dorian can stay. She has 1 more year as well. So we may see her be the champion next year, as she was quite close.
And at this point, is Sophia Flörsch the only female driver in like F3 and F2?
She is. There's no female driver in F2, and Sophia Flörsch is the only female driver in F3.
Yeah.
And before her was Tatiana Calderon, who is no longer in
who drove for Arden in like 2019 or whatever.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And she was just in the Formula E all-female test. So it might be interesting to see where she ends up. But she's also one of those people who made it very far and couldn't make it all the way. So I think it's interesting because you look at it and there has been the talent, obviously, but the women like Sophia, like Tatiana, like Jamie, and like Jess Hawkins, and even going all the way back to Susie, you have these women who very clearly have had the talent to keep pushing, but it has been an issue of sponsorship and money and excitement behind wanting a woman in those seats. And so I think if we can, as content creators and as people in this space, promote F1 Academy as much as possible, and also not forget about these women after they leave F1 Academy, like continuing to follow Abbi Pulling next year and see how great she does and cover her racing. It's important for us to be able to show that like that's what the market wants too. So hopefully we'll see that as well next year.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Also, in IndyCar, Catherine Legg, who
Mhm.
probably will drive in the Indy 500 again this year, who drives in IMSA, I believe.
Mhm.
But I know she also drove a few races for Dale Coyne at the end of last season. So the 500 was not her only race. So
She's pointing towards a full season in IndyCar, and I'm hoping that that's what happens.
fingers
Hoping.
crossed.
Yeah.
But also fans should definitely follow her
Yeah.
and everything. She's like so experienced and seems like a very lovely person too.
She is, and also, I actually had a chance to interview her earlier in the year at the Long Beach IndyCar race. So if you scroll all the way back in this feed or on YouTube, you can see it. It's like back in April, but
Mm-hmm.
she is so kind and so like focused on who she is and what she does and what she brings to a track. And I think it would be really cool because one of the other things that people may not know about her if they only watched her IndyCar races that were sort of at the end of the season and also the Indy 500 is because, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, she is racing in EMSA. She is going back and forth from a single seater and a sports car, which are completely different.
Yeah.
Which another driver who does that or did that this year was Chloe Chambers. Chloe, who is moving over to be the Red Bull Ford driver next year, and will be part of the Ford Performance Academy and driving for Ford in the GT Challenge as well, I believe, next year. You're seeing these drivers who not only are very talented in single seaters, are able to go from two completely different setups in the same season. And Catherine Legg is one of
Yeah.
those drivers. So if you're only looking at sort of her results in some of these oval races that she did, because every race that she did this season was an oval, you're also kind of forgetting about the fact that everything she was doing before that and all of her training all year has been focused on sort of sports car racing, and that's what she's competing in full time. And then she's also on top of that training single seater ovals. And same with Chloe. Chloe, we saw win an F1 Academy race and was going back and forth between sports car racing and winning sports car races this year too. So these women are very, very talented, and I would love to see everybody get a little more excited.
Yeah, for sure.
So, yeah.
Fair enough.
But yeah, that's the update from F1 Academy.
One more set of news. I don't know if you saw it.
Mm.
Apparently Esteban Ocon is not going to drive in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
Okay, I saw this and I read the article, and where the source seems to come from is an article from Planet F1. It was the first article I saw that broke it, and then I've been seeing it reposted after that. But
I see it on motorsport.com right now.
is it officially on motorsport.com?
Yeah.
Okay, this is more interesting because when I had first read it before we started, I saw just the source of the rumor seemed to be we asked and they didn't say no. But if it's on
Mm-hmm.
motorsport.com, it's a little bit more, usually a little bit more fact checked at that point.
It says motorsport.com set to stand down and give Jack Doohan an opportunity to make his debut at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I mean, what a terrible way to go out. I mean, I
Yeah.
know he's going to Haas next year, so he'll have another full season. And Haas is like, their trajectory is up, and Alpine has been better over the second half of the season. But what a sort of sad way to end your tenure.
It seems like an
in this French style
unnecessary
fit,
thing,
yeah.
unless there's a fact that like something going on that we don't know about that they need to see Jack in a race for. But it just seems like such an unnecessary choice to do it that way. And also for Jack, it's kind of a weird way to debut in the final race, taking it away from another driver. Like I'd rather see him debut in the beginning of the season and testing.
Apparently, it has to do with Esteban wanting to be released to be able to test for Haas in the Abu Dhabi test, which happens a few days after
I
the
see.
race. And he requested it, and so
Bummer. I mean,
yeah.
if it was his request, I guess it's a little bit different. But I also still feel like on his side a little weird because most of the people who are moving are going to test and still finish their season off. The only person I believe that won't be doing that is Lewis. He hasn't been released, and everyone's sort of cool about that. Seems to have been a non-issue between Fred and Toto and Lewis overall. But yeah, that's very odd to not want to finish out.
Yeah, and also it could be the team asked him to, because apparently they were trying to get him to be sort of match Pierre's performance, because Pierre Gasly has just been on
Out of control. I love
and
it.
he's been in incredible form the last like 6-7 races. Has been qualifying really well.
Mhm.
Has been really, really impressive given how far behind that Alpine is from the other cars, especially in the top 4 teams. So I think they were trying to pressure him to match him, and he just has the performance hasn't been there, with the exception, of course,
Yeah.
Brazil.
Right. Yeah, that's fair, I guess. But at this point, I mean, I guess I'd have to look closer at the point standings to see if there's a big difference in where they'll finish off
Yeah,
based off of that. But it's a little bit of a bummer, especially because like just a second ago we had this amazing double podium with them, and it would have been nice for that to have just sort of finished out on and put a bow on the season.
yeah. I also wanted to, and we don't have to talk about this if you
Yeah,
don't want to, but
let
I
me know.
would love to talk to you briefly about the Formula One diversity, equity, and
Oh
inclusion
yeah, let's talk
charter,
about it. Yeah, let's do it.
as well as the incredibly negative reaction in the comments section on the Formula One Instagram page. I don't know if you had an opportunity to read
I did
the
not
comments.
read the comments intentionally.
Yeah, I would encourage you not to. You know, the comments were overwhelmingly negative,
Yeah,
and it just reminds me of how toxic social media can be at times, because often like the loudest opinion is not the popular opinion or the correct one.
mhm,
It's just there are some people who feel very passionate about one side and are going to be really loud and aggressive about it, and maybe the people who are feel opposite just don't want to deal with that level of trolling and toxic negativity on the
yeah,
internet.
yeah,
um, I think it's great, especially because especially in this country and in other parts of the world, we're seeing this pushback on DEI initiatives.
mhm,
Like we've seen corporations start to roll back their DEI programs and initiatives, which I think is a mistake.
mhm,
Um, and I think it's great that Formula One is taking this opportunity, and all the teams are on board to sign this charter. I think like diversity, equity, and inclusion is important for any organization.
yeah.
Um, and it was really sad to see the fan pushback on that.
I think here's what I'll say about the fan pushback. I actually saw a couple of different versions of fan pushback. The obvious one that you're talking about, which is the very negative, we hate the idea of diversity, which is frustrating and unfortunately just the way of the world, which I guess I I I intentionally didn't read the comments on the post because I knew that that would be a portion of it, right? There's going to always be people that are not interested in that. And this sport in particular is one of the least diverse sports out there.
Yeah.
It's one of the most expensive sports to compete in. And because of that, it means that there's ultimately going to be a certain type of person that makes it in and that comes from a background that can afford to do so. Um, and when you look at something and like I talk to my friends about, like Formula One and trying to get them into it, and they're like, "Oh, which one is your favorite driver?" and those types of things. And I always talk about Lewis. And the shock that people have when you're like, he's the only black driver, not just on the grid, but ever.
Ever.
Just in the history of Formula One is really interesting from people that don't know anything about the sport. Um,
Yeah.
and you see that across the board. You see that there's a heavy push towards British drivers in general. There have been a history of, I would say, more Spanish drivers. We have 2 Spanish drivers on the grid. And then you see the response of it's not just a Lewis situation. It's not just a lack of black drivers. There's also the fact that you have Franco Colapinto is the first Argentinian driver on the grid in so long that when you get to the Brazil race, you have every flight into Sao Paulo, and also multiple buses of people from Argentina that drove to get to the track just to be there because Franco was there. There are so many parts of this sport that we consider to be a global sport. This is a sport that travels the world, that goes to multiple continents, and is around so many different fans, so many different languages, that it's a sport that transcends so much different culture. And there are so many different types of fans of this sport.
Mhm.
And overall, I think you're leaving so much on the table by not opening yourself up to including more diversity in that space.
Yeah.
Even like having teams that are from different nations as a team itself, even if it's not the driver, is important because you see so much national pride with Ferrari. You see so much excitement about, an Italian team in Italy and what that means to those drivers and to those fans.
Yeah,
And that right now they don't even have an Italian driver and they won't for a period of time. And it's exciting for them to be able to engage in that. And you see the economic value of that team and of the sport raise when you include various people. So the more that you do that, the more that it's just better for the sport overall.
I agree.
And it's just frustrating to see the pushback.
I think it's in every organization's best interest to be as diverse as possible because it attracts more people to it. It attracts more employees, more sponsors, more partners, and more fans.
Yeah.
And I don't totally understand. There's this misconception about like DEI initiatives that it's about hiring somebody who's less qualified. That's not what it's about.
Not at
It's
all.
like it's about welcoming people in and like fighting like nepotism and making more of an effort to like hire outside of your typical networks. In case of like Formula One, hiring outside of like the networks that have been predominantly male and white.
Right.
It's like, we're just asking you to like work a little harder to try to find the right candidate. And it's like about fixing like an imbalance in an organization and then like ensuring people who've been historically like disempowered and like deprived of equal opportunity, like get it and aren't denied it simply because of like their identity and they're given a fair and equitable chance to succeed. Like, it's just like in any organization that's like more diverse, you have a greater like assortment of ideas, like approaches to problem solving, and it's a more accurate representation of like the world that we live in. It's just like, it was baffling to me seeing how many people like felt threatened by it.
It's interesting because I didn't even really, like I said, I knew it would be there, so I didn't read it. But I also think like, not to get into it, but like I get comments every day that are of that kind of variety. And so I think maybe I'm just a little bit like, I just knew that would be the response. That's the response all the time. And it's the
Yeah.
response even just like not, there's no program that's helping me get on the internet. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just a general kind of desire for something to stay the way that it always has been. And I think it's good that the organization itself is finally recognizing that they don't have to be what they've always been.
Sure.
And I do hope that ways, I think we're seeing that across the board, right? Like F1 Academy getting the push that it got this year that we've discussed is the organization saying, okay, you know what, maybe we have made a mistake in the way that we've managed the women in this space. Maybe we have made some errors that have put up bigger barriers that have made it harder for the possibility of that to happen. And maybe we are ignoring some of our own history with the 5 women who have driven in Formula One, that have, like with Lella Lombardi, that has scored points, that we know that there is a history of women in this sport that is really important. And so F1 Academy, to me, whether you think it's been perfectly executed or not, the teams and the organization getting behind the sport this year is them looking at it and saying, okay, maybe we have done something wrong and maybe we can fix it. And this DEI charter is also a step towards the same thing. It's a step towards looking at it and saying, okay, the most famous and most popular driver on the grid is also the only Black driver that's ever been here. And when you look at the excitement that you get, like I said, from Franco, when you look at the excitement that even Checo brings when he's not at a level that he's winning races and he's had his beef with Red Bull and he hasn't been in a perfectly exciting environment. But you look at how excited Mexican fans are to have Checo on the grid. And you look at, like we talked about with Pato, like we see this in all sports, in all motorsports as well. But like the IndyCar CEO saying Pato who, and then Pato going and hosting a meetup to the point that like he physically could not have, even if he had stayed there for the rest of his life, he never would have met every single person that showed up. Those photos were incredible. I think sometimes eventually organizations look at it and realize that they're leaving a lot on the table in terms of a fan base, in terms of sponsorship, in terms of excitement, and also in terms of making the sport itself better. And I think if fans are of the mentality that that's bad, then potentially you're not a fan of this sport. Something that people need to take a hard look at.
I think that's actually one of the things that's holding other motorsport series back. I think it's one of the reasons why you don't have the growth in NASCAR that you would expect, or the growth in IndyCar, because especially with NASCAR, it's a fan base and a series that is predominantly like white, Southern, and conservative. And a lot of people, but not just conservative, like aggressively conservative. And I think a lot of prospective fans are turned off by that because they feel like, oh, this might be an environment where if I'm like I'm slightly like deviating from what that norm is, I might not feel welcome.
Right. Yeah. And I think hopefully this is just the first step in them trying to make people feel a little bit more welcome in this sport. And I think, honestly, I would say that I think F1 has made a lot of changes in the last couple of years to make that possible. I don't think that these types of things happen overnight. I did see some people saying that, like, they wish that there were a little bit more clear benchmarks that they're expected to hit, or these different things. But what I would say is that, unfortunately, institutional change takes time, and being able to take a first step in such a big manner is a really big deal. And also, I don't know how many people know this, but Mission 44, which is Lewis's company that works toward, or Lewis's nonprofit that works towards that diversity and inclusion in the sport, did advise on this DEI charter that F1 is now adopting. And their organization has been doing quite a bit. They bring a lot of people to the track, both in the driver capacity and also students who might be interested in being engineers or working on the team or being a mechanic. They are bringing students that are, middle school and high school to the track all over the world. And they're bringing, women, they're bringing these different kids who would not have those opportunities to sort of start dreaming a little bit bigger earlier on. And so I think that has been really great work that has laid a lot of the groundwork for, I would assume, Mission 44 to be able to provide numbers to Formula One and say, like, this is what our work on a small scale has been able to do. And this is what you can change too. So
I hope it's not just performative. And I hope it has sort of the same byproduct that like a program like Girls on Track has had, because there's a number of people I have met who now work in motorsport, and their introduction to the world of motorsport and their realization that they could actually do it and be a part of it was a program that it is as simple as Girls on Track.
Yeah.
So I hope like you say, there's actionable items that are happening, and it's not just a performative statement.
Yeah. And I honestly, these types of things, like, I generally think that when you make the effort and that you're going to get the blowback and the pushback that we discussed, like, generally speaking, they're spending the time and the effort because they want to do it, not because they think it certainly didn't give them 100% positive reaction, I guess, is the point. So I do hope that, having measured that, knowing that that's what it was, that this was also an intentional step forward in the process.
For sure.
So it'd be cool. I guess the last thing we have is just the sort of predictions for the final race, which there's not much left to predict. It'll just be whether or not Ferrari or McLaren takes constructors.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like Ferrari to take the constructors, because I feel like, and not that I'm like particularly a Ferrari fan, but I feel like Ferrari doing well is good for the sport, just given that they have the biggest fan base and the most passionate fan base. I feel like to a lesser degree, McLaren has like a decent following, but like, I just think it's like good for the sport when Ferrari's doing well and Ferrari's on top. I do think McLaren is going to secure the constructors title at Abu Dhabi, though.
I agree. I think it would take a disaster for them not to, I think. As much as I love Ferrari and I love it, but honestly, actually, I would like to see McLaren be able to take that constructors championship. I think their season story has been so up and down and so dramatic. And so it would be nice for all of the effort and excitement that both Lando and Oscar have put in, and also, quite frankly, like the negative energy they've had to deal with. It would be very exciting for them to take that home.
It's also such a long time coming, because like you look at the most successful teams in Formula One history, and a lot of people rate it by like constructors titles. Williams is the second most successful team in regards to constructors titles. even though McLaren has significantly more drivers' championships than Williams. Like I think Williams has like 9 constructors titles.
Mm-hmm.
McLaren has 8, but McLaren has like 12 drivers championships.
Mm-hmm.
And it would cement them as the second most, I believe, team in Formula One history behind Ferrari, of course. And also, I think it would just be a nice bow on the trajectory that McLaren has taken in the last 10 years. You look at them in the mid 2000s and they were embarrassing. Like, I mean, I don't think it's like there's any other way to say it.
Yeah.
Like they had little to no sponsors. An aging Ron Dennis was running the team. They had terrible issues with the Honda power unit, really bad reliability issues with the car. This was one of the most iconic teams in Formula One that essentially was going through what Williams is going through right now. And they sort of did like a full reset where they ousted Ron Dennis. They brought in this triumvirate of like Zach Brown and I forget this other person's name. He's like the COO, Jonathan something. He's like a COO of McLaren.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time it was this team principal. And then I think eventually over time, Zach Brown started assuming like a little bit more power and responsibility as the CEO of McLaren. But, you look at their trajectory in the last 10 years, and then you look at their trajectory just in the last 2 years. You look at where they were at the beginning of the 2023 season, and everybody was talking about Lando Norris jumping ship because McLaren was such a disaster and they were just at the back of the grid. And you see them now, and so just props to them. Like, they really turned it around. And if they're able to take this momentum into next year, they will by far have the best car on the grid.
Agreed. It will be very exciting to see, I think. And so it would be nice also, I think, one of the things I do think is important for next season is Lando's confidence. And I think if they're able to hold on to the Constructors' Championship and close that out, I think that will be a big stepping stone for the team's just sort of morale, because despite the excitement of this season, despite the turnaround that they've been able to do, they have been getting hammered in the press, and Lando in particular has been sort of back and forth. And I've criticized him. I think he's done things that were worth criticizing, but I think in general, one of the things that he really needs is a boost in his confidence and in his belief that he belongs here. I think is really
he
important.
belongs here. It's more like his belief that he can like contend for a driver's championship.
Yeah, I think what I would love to see him next year, and I think the Constructors' Championship can change for him, is for him to be able to say like fully like that he is a driver's champion contender. And I think he needs to enter the year next year with that mentality.
I'm not saying that Lando Norris is Max Verstappen, but if he's comparing himself to Max, he's only a year behind where Max is. Like Max won his first driver's championship at 24.
Right.
Lando Norris is 24. And he's going to finish second in the driver's standings. So like, I said this before on another podcast, but just seeing where they were 2 years ago and seeing where he is now, he went into this season not having a race win.
Yeah.
He's now multiple race winner and contended for the driver's championship. He should be incredibly like pleased and happy with the progress he's made and where he currently is in his career.
Absolutely. I agree. And I hope, Lando, if you're listening, which I'm sure you're not, I hope to see him really have the support that he needs to be able to lock into that next year, to beat himself up a little bit less and to be in that space where he really truly believes what I think a lot of people believe, which is that he really had a chance to win this year. And that through things that weren't necessarily completely his fault, that didn't happen. But I think if he goes into next year believing that he can, then I think we'll see a completely different season from him. And I also think that, to be totally fair to him, coming into the season, there was no real belief that they would have been in a space where they could until Miami. And so to have to make that turnaround in the middle of the season in that way, that was only in May, to be able to turn around and focus in that way. I think if he's able to start next year from the very beginning, I think he'll be in good shape.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess in our keep your head up motivational poster for Lando, that might be the end of the episode.
I love that. Hang in there, kitty.
Hang in there, kitty. James, thanks for hanging out. This is great.
Thanks for having me.
Anyways, if you don't want to watch these races alone, you can join the actual grid chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the grid chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/grid chat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.